Hello everyone, and welcome to a new series on my channel where I will be exploring the creation of Windows from Windows 1 up until Windows 10 Technical Preview. But today we're going to start out with Windows 1 Developer Release 5 because that is the earliest known version of Windows that is confirmed. But first what you want to do is you want to run fdisk and a DOS prompt. I've already created it once, so I'm just going to delete it. But you would just hit everything, enter would work until you get back to this. Make sure you are running DOS 2.x. That always works the easiest for me, but then after you've run fdisk, you type format C:/S and then just any key, and then C just to test, and then sys to C, and then switch to C, disconnect your mouse, go find your developer release disk 1, and then change back to your A drive, and then type copy install.bat to C, and then change to your C drive, type install. But before you press enter, please note that in PCM version 0.3, which is the easiest to get working with Windows 1 Developer Release, when you hit Control End to release the mouse, it counts that as a key press. So when the files are being copied to the to C, make sure you release the mouse while they're still being copied. But you would just pretty much keep hitting enter until it asks for the yes or no questions. Erase from the lib, yes. Erase from Windows, file not found, yes is fine. And then Control End to release the mouse. And then disk 2 of 3, and then yes, release. And then disk 3 of 3, and then you do not have to disconnect this floppy disk, and then you type mswin here to start, and it runs kernel, and then it starts up Windows 1 Developer Release 5, which is the earliest known or attainable version of Windows. So it has a control panel which you can change the blink rate, double click speed, time. It has a clock, and these were all things that were in Windows 1, and this clock actually made its way all up to XP, which is pretty interesting that Microsoft never really made any drastic changes until Windows Vista. But if you go into the Windows dock and try and open Canda, it doesn't open, but its timestamp is before this developer release was compiled, which was November of 1984, and this says 10/30/1984, which means that it could have been pulled from a previous version of Windows, but that is not confirmed. It's just a theory as to the release of Windows. But even in the Windows remove.bat, this has a slightly earlier date than the canda.doc file. It's got one day before. So this could also have just been pulled from a previous version of Windows that we don't know about. But your test folder has all of your applications, developer applications, your source codes, your H and C files, It's got reversey, which is always fun, except this is very, very hard. Very hard, indeed. I usually end up losing on the Windows one because it is so difficult. But aside from that, to minimize, you would just grab this title bar up here and drag all the way down to the future taskbar area, and then to open said file you would just double click, and double clicking this button up here maximizes it. And then I made an illegal move. This button closes it, you only click it once, and it's got all sorts of various sample applications and whatnot. I'm not really sure what to do here or how to play it, but I guess that's just what you do. So you have a bunch of applications here, sample applications, which I think is really smart because this was the first version of Windows. It is very different from DOS. As you can see, it does have the MS-DOS Executive, but it does have a slightly more graphical interface and easier to use than DOS, where DOS does not have mouse support as far as I know. But Windows eventually made it to almost every single desktop computer, minus a few. At the time, in 1984, 1985, that time in the 80s, it was meant to be a competitor with, I believe it was Xerox, their operating system, and the Macintosh system. And this is nothing like what Windows looks like today. But it is definitely a major milestone for Microsoft, even though they already had DOS. But this made Windows so much better, and you could have multiple applications at once, and you could minimize them. And it was just a really big step for Microsoft, and it was a very large success. But there's not really much to this developer release 5, except it is all in black and white, whereas DOS was in multiple colors occasionally, or like DOS 6, which I believe came after this, but I'm not quite sure. I don't know my DOS history. I thought I saw a color file somewhere, but it does require a color display for some reason, even though it shows no colors, which I find interesting. But yeah, this is essentially what Windows ended up looking like, or Windows 1 at least. Very simplistic, but still a great thing that they had accomplished, Microsoft. Yeah, it's quite interesting to actually go back and see what Windows was like in the 80s and the 90s, and prior to the 9X kernel, really. So that's pretty much it for Windows 1, but if you do close it, you get this dialog box saying this will end your Windows session. You can click OK and cancel, but you are not allowed to move your mouse out of the box, which I find kind of interesting. How they did that, I'm not really sure. But you just hit OK, and it asks for command.com in drive A. I think that's a DOS disk. Oh, it is. So you can type in MS-WIN again, and it will go back into Windows. If you want more information, I would suggest going to the Beta Wiki. They give you install instructions and how to install it without needing the MS-DOS startup disk every time. So if you would like to install this and have this in a permanent virtual machine rather than just a one-time session, you could go there and figure out how to install it without the need for constantly putting in the startup disk. But that's all I have to say about Windows 1 Developer Release 5. Stay tuned for my next video where I will be viewing Windows 1 Alpha.